What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here for our discussion-based Thursday today, so hopefully you guys enjoy today's video. We're going to be taking a look at the Final Fantasy XIV discussion Reddit, and we got a topic here today. We have actually a bunch of different topics we've gathered, so hopefully you guys can look forward to future videos here as we kind of dive into what the community's talking about. And today's post is actually quite interesting, so if we kind of just pull it up here on screen, why does nobody talk about the Lackluster Final Fantasy XIV events? Chris, this is the one that when I was kind of giving you all the different little discussion topics that we've kind of collected for our Thursdays here. This is the one that stood out to you the most, and why we're filming on this one first. Just off the title alone, what's your hot take?
Nobody, not one person ever. Like, absolutes are always perfect. Like, nobody, not one person has ever talked about Final Fantasy XIV events. And definitely not in the context of how other games run events, which are very different. So to catch everybody up on how Final Fantasy XIV events work, the initial description here is right. Typically, they're available in a main city. Typically, they're available at very low level, let's say level 15. You're going to go through a brief quest line. They are meant to be done usually under an hour, some of them under 20 minutes. You're going to go take part in content that we know everybody has unlocked, so we can't drag you through a dungeon or anything. It needs to be something available at level 15. So it will be like a fate or a series of battle quests or something like that. You'll get some form of cosmetic, a title, a costume, a mount, a minion, something like that, a furnishing. And then 1 year after that, when the event comes back around, that item will become available in the Mog Station, give or take, because some don't do that.
But not earnable in game. So that's kind of the thing. Like the only opportunity to earn it is when it is the first time it comes through. After that, it is a cash purchase, cash op item.
And that is because the majority of seasonal events in the game, like Christmas events, Halloween events, etc., the event comes back around, but it is a new and different quest line each and every time. The quest line does not repeat. There are some events, like the Final Fantasy XI event, which just ended yesterday, where that is a repeat event, and it comes back, and now thanks to New Game Plus, that it's done with a replay feature. Previously, you just had nothing to do, but now you can replay it if you want. You don't get any new rewards or achievements. If you get halfway through it, you get to keep your achievements, so it's pretty low stakes. But some of those come back around, like the Final Fantasy 15 collab, the Garo event. These things, they come back around in a near identical state, or like Yokai Watch, they come around in an upgraded state. Now, compare that to, they're comparing it to Guild Wars, and then I'm also going to compare it to WoW, because those are the two MMOs in my life outside of Final Fantasy 14. So Guild Wars, the events are much larger. Because you are at max level from the base game onward, the events kind of become a huge portion of the content in this game when you're also comparing it to things like PvP, things like raids. They are on that scale. So they have all sorts of different currencies and achievements, and they just get piled on, and they're going on all the time. And there's all these different world events. So imagine if, like, the game never really added new MSQ that was required. There was new MSQ that was added that was optional. And so then alongside that, we would dump more time into fates. We would dump more time. And so things would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so by the time you look at that, like, the events in Guild Wars are of a scale that just doesn't even make sense in something that's a little more hamster wheel driven, like Final Fantasy 14 or WoW. And then WoW events, they come around every year and they're identical. And then kind of like the Yokai Watch, some expansions, they bolt some stuff on. So they're like, hey, go around and collect candy from all the inns in the game. Hey, it's a new expansion. We're going to go ahead and add candy buckets to the new inns. Like we're just kind of like just slapping things on top. But it is largely that they continue to exist, and you're not losing anything, as opposed to Final Fantasies in Trade for Unique Storyline. They have to rewrite one every year. They don't reuse them. And so that does limit what the scale of these can be.
So there is a counterpoint to that view, because we actually in this game have had events that break that rule of do fate, talk to NPC, call it a day. Right? Garo having returned is a good example of that, offering a wide range and deep dive into PvP that lasted a long time. The Yokai Watch event, being something that lasts a very long time, has a lot and big grind associated with it. Yeah, that is phase-based, because event in my mind should also be something that can kind of take part in the systems that already exist, rather than just building out some kind of unique structure that only is a part of like the event. Like that actually takes a lot more design from the core gameplay design. And so I think to answer the question beyond the why does nobody talk about it, because I think we've talked about it. I think that there's a couple of, different avenues that conversation could go. It could be that, well, people really aren't generally receptive to that. Go look at the official forums within just on Square Enix alone. Like, people have talked about this whole add-on controversy and the real story behind it that I haven't heard people talk about it. But my view on that entire idea is that you get dunked on, you get crapped on, you get hate. People have gotten death threats for who make add-ons, but you get so much resistance to providing feedback to Final Fantasy XIV from the Final Fantasy XIV's perfect crowd that I think ultimately that does shut down people's thoughts. So everybody who comes into the game is excited and they're like, oh man, it would be great if it did X. And then they just get hit. Eventually they get hit enough that they just like, we're just not going to talk about it. And then what ultimately happens is that ultimately things kind of blow up. And then Yoshi P is like, oh, I guess we'll go look into these things that y'all have probably stated you've wanted on the forums and on Reddit and stuff like that. But it didn't, it got so suppressed by there's a kind of a vocal minority that does that. So why does nobody talk about it? People get tired of getting hit. Like, you just get fatigued. It's like, hey, I've stated this, I'm moving on. But in terms of the events themselves, I think it's kind of a matter. Like, we do get events that I think are really interesting, but then we do have those kind of seasonal mini style events that kind of occur pretty regularly. And on the feedback side of things, I would venture, like, my personal feedback is that I would rather them invest in, like the new Deep Dungeon over a new, one-time event that especially is limited. Now, this is where
Mines, Monster Hunter collab, Deep Dungeons, Golden Saucer, these things that serve a similar function to events for many players, where they're this wildly optional. They don't feel like heavy character progression in many cases, but it is something that you do just for the fun of it. Crystal Conflict has kind of become that thing.
Yeah.
You're just doing it for the fun of it. Is it progressing your account? No. Are the rewards that great? I'm just doing it because it's fun. I'm just doing it because it's fun, and that's okay. And so when I look at the word events, I think that's kind of what you're honing in on. I would rather them pick a more sustainable event than spend a bunch of energy on a one-time party.
So, like, in that regards, like, that's something where I think to take a real positive feedback approach of what I would like is that having an event that comes in, every year, like almost in a way that you have the Golden Saucer, event that basically makes all the games more rewarding, but takes part in that, right? But as a way of kind of building onto that. So year over year, it doesn't become anything that is, well, this is only going to be done for 3 weeks and then it's out of the game forever, that seasonal style. More or less making it just like we've got the Yokai Watch and the Garo event where, maybe those events are around for 3 months every 2 years. And over time, you end up building these bigger events that have that repeating factor, but then also add on to it each and every time. So a new player doesn't necessarily get caught off. I think essentially that aspect that the event goes away and you might not participate in it is that artificial based FOMO, because they could technically kind of bring that back. But the fact that they bring the event stuff into the cash shop, it is what it is, right? Like that, I don't see that changing at all, but I see things like the Yokai Watch event, and these are all more of the collaboration events as hopefully filling in that gap. And what I want to see more with those events is kind of that returning thing. We saw the Lightning event with Final Fantasy 13 collab. We've seen a 15 collab. Maybe we'll get to see something with 16. And being that those are also all Square Enix properties, like I wouldn't mind it if they were on a 2 or 3 year cycle. And then ultimately you have so many of them that you actually have one pretty much consistently going at least every year, or at least within any kind of, like, maybe, ideally I'd like to get to the point where, like, imagine if we had 2-3 month long events like spring and fall or summer and winter or something like that happen every year, and then they just kind of cycle in every couple of years, because that also gives us variety. That also tells somebody who's coming into the game and starting at NN Walker or 7.0 or 8.0, it's like, oh, if you stick around this summer, this event that we haven't seen in 3 years is actually coming back, and you're gonna have, there's some rewards and they add on to it, and so that these are just kind of evolving. And I think ultimately I don't know anybody within the community that would be resistant to that, because then you basically would almost categorize events as two different things. You have seasonal, and then you have collab or collaborative events in which they kind of partner up with other IPs or other, things like that. But I thought this was an interesting post because it does bring in some things that other games are doing well, and I don't think that's a bad thing to do. Like, I love feedback from other games. I like when other games do interesting things because it could actually lead to growth within both Final Fantasy XIV, but as the genre as it exists as a whole.
And I think the poster a little further down hits on that, like Blue Mage is a good example of content like this that can feel special and unique. And so I would say, you hit a lot there. The poster hits on a lot. Guild Wars does it well. Most of the events in this, if you really write down on paper, because of the way events are rolled out, are fairly simple and formulaic. And so if you don't enjoy the stories of it, for a lot of times when I've been frustrated with the stories of it is when I was a story skipper, didn't mean anything to me. I just complete 4 quests and get a cosmetic. Let me Google the cosmetic and see if it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And when I started getting into the story, I actually found that a lot of times, because it's a thing that expires, they have taken it as an opportunity to put very commentary-based stories in it. So it feels very like a South Park or Family Guy joke that won't age because it is very of its time. Where that joke may not be something that we remember the context of, like, oh, when did that episode air? Oh, that's really interesting. This is what was in the news. Some age well, but some don't. And so that's what it feels like. Like there was a Christmas event, Christmas of 2020, where the event was about a disease and the event was about this cure. And ultimately, I don't know if they intended the writing, but the way I received it was that some rich guy came in and bought up all the medicine and then picked one person to jump to the front of the line and get the medicine. And that guy got a better outcome because he was connected to somebody wealthy. I don't think that's what the writing was trying to say, but as somebody who'd been trapped in their home since March, I didn't really need that in my video game. Like I already lived somewhere where wealthy people were having better outcomes. It didn't feel good. And so like it's given them an opportunity where if that had to live forever, maybe they wouldn't have taken it as such a commentary opportunity. So I will say, like, the one advantage of it, the one silver lining, as much as I just named a bad example, is that they get a chance to comment. They can, if they want to poke fun at Asmongold coming to the game, if they want to poke fun at DPS meters, they can do it in the next seasonal quest that hasn't been written yet. And they can say, man, I just wish there was some sort of way. I've been using this abacus while I fight. Do you think that if you fought, I could count for you and we could get a feel for how much damage you do? Don't worry. I would stay over here, like almost third party. Like they could write that in because it's seasonal and it expires. Yeah. And like we know it and we laugh and we have a good time. And they can jump in and tackle that. The anniversary events are like that. It's this letter from Yoshi P, and you come across this character that looks like Yoshi P, and he's this wandering minstrel, and he's chatting with you, and he's like, I don't know, I just feel like there's these people that are shaping this world, and I owe them so much, and I wish I could tell them thank you. And it's like, and that's what it is. It's literally just a love letter that he writes us in-game annually, in addition to writing us one out in the world. And so there is a beauty to these that I would say don't lose that in this discussion. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, they could be better. They could improve. Guild Wars is a great example of a game that, because of its format, has been able to succeed and dominate in this category. And World of Warcraft has shown, okay, well, what if an element of seasonal events builds? The advantage there being, okay, you didn't know you were going to make it the first 10 years. Mm-hmm. You did. Now you're planning for 10 years. If you add a little bit to these seasonal events, and you say, you know what, every time we're going to add a seasonal event, and it's going to have a component that stays and a component that expires, then in 10 years, we're going to have 10 components that stay. And so what's going to happen slowly as these events age from this point forward, now that we know we want this game to turn 20, we want this game to turn 30, and that is the intention, there's something really cool about new players coming in 5 years from now and getting all this backlog, as opposed to right now. I mean, there's seasonal events from Heavensward that you and I probably missed, and it's just gone.
Yeah, I end up kind of focusing in on a couple seasonal events that I find the most engaging: summer, Halloween, and Christmas. And then if there's ever an event that actually has a mount tied to it, like, then that becomes an absolute priority. So that is very reward heavily driven for me. But the summer event, the Christmas event, and the Halloween event have always just been kind of my favorite events within Final Fantasy XIV, even back when they first started them. So that's always been important. Now, one of the things I would like to see as kind of my final thought and takeaway here is that there's a lot of interesting content, and an event doesn't necessarily need to be something so big that has a story kind of driven to it. We're seeing something like that with the kind of the series system brought into PvP, and ultimately it'd be kind of interesting to see if they were like, you know what? Yeah, we've got the gold saucer stuff. Like, is there kind of isn't there a way, like, hey guys, for the month of September, it's Deep Dungeon September, and in this month as an event, like, Deep Dungeon rewards are going to be doubled, and we're going to do this, right. And then maybe there's a reward track. And so ultimately, like, you could end up kind of having it to where you're like, oh, within this game, they're going to incentivize these things. And when I say a reward track, I don't mean like something that expires. Like, imagine if there was something that was
guaranteed a cursed horde for every floor.
Right. And then all of a sudden it's like boom. And so then you don't have to do it. You don't have to participate in it. It isn't like there's extra lore that's tied into it, but it's a way of kind of driving the community into kind of a focus of a specific piece of content. And then that kind of rotates in and out. We're starting to see kind of the birth of that with the Unreal trials in that regards, like something that comes in for that period of like a period of time. And then ideally will come back. And I think the important aspect when it comes to any kind of content that does turn on and off, that there is kind of a return, and you can kind of become aware of what that is, so that you're not sitting here going like stressing out like, oh God, I'm going to miss out on, this summertime, event that generally applies. But 14's also experimented with a couple different things. They've experimented with sub for a period of time, get a mount, and they were talking about doing that more and more, and then they stopped completely. I think they probably saw
people feel trapped.
People feel trapped. Well, they also
it gets memed on.
Yeah, when it comes to a subscription, we've seen World of Warcraft and them, like literally like frustrating.
I just renewed my sub for the first time.
Welcome back.
And I got a mount. It just gave me a mount as a thank you, because I renewed for 6 months because I'm going to play through Dragonflight. I think is a building block to kind of pick this up off of. I would say an example of everything that Brian's describing is Moogle Tomestone events. It changes the way people play temporarily.
I love that.
The relic steps that say go out and do fates. New Blue Mage stuff where people go out and do fates. And so there are these times where like the patch content causes something seasonally. There are these times where something happens that it changes the way we play. And I think those are really healthy. Half patches do a lot of that. The Arc Sidara, all of a sudden we're all going to be in Thavnir for some reason. And so there are these times that it kind of causes that. And I think that's really good. And we should, what I think the post is asking for is don't stop. Like Moogle Tomestones are great. Do more. Garo's great. Do more. And so I think it's a fair criticism. I don't think it's that nobody's talking about the feedback, but you can't be in this community. Very few people find the desire to stick around and be overly critical continuously.
Yeah.
And that is an advantage because this feels like a very positive and wonderful community. We don't have people that stick around that just openly hate the game all the time. But the downside of that is that like also the devs never really get feedback. And so there are aspects of this game that after people have been here several expansions, there are parts that start to feel very predictable. As opposed to like, I think WoW suffers from too much change and they get a lot of, let's call it critical feedback.
Well, anyway, guys, we're definitely always in the pro feedback camp when it comes to these games, and especially when it comes to kind of giving the devs your feedback. So if you've ever felt that your feedback has been dunked on by some people in the 14 community, continue to provide it as best as you can. And if you don't feel comfortable, you can always provide your feedback for the game to us, and we will bring it into these discussions as well. So feel free to sound off with that in the comments below. We'll do our best to address those in an upcoming community feedback. If you guys haven't seen kind of the new schedule, we're looking at kind of more news focused posts Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, discussion either Wednesday and Thursday, but Thursday for sure. And then maybe hopefully we'll get our community feedback spun back up on Fridays to give you guys some great content throughout the week regarding Final Fantasy 14 and Square Enix as we get ready to like more and more things keep seeming to point that 16 is pretty daggum close, and I think that's going to be exciting for everyone involved. Anyway, Chris, why don't you take us out?
Square has the ability to just hold on to it and drop it like Apex Legends.
That would be amazing. They
have that capability.
They do. That's how I think games should release now. I don't think like these hype cycles of PR, like it should be just like, even if it's not like Apex Legends, like even if it's like, and guys, next month, this is when it drops. And so all of a sudden you have a month of just like, what? Because like everybody's skeptical. Everybody's kind of been burnt. But again, like we said, congratulations to Final Fantasy 15, the third game in the history of Final Fantasy to cross over 10 million units sold. So no small feat. And that's incredible. Also, huge shout out. We should have shouted out at the beginning. We'll do our next one. Mione, over 100K have subscribed over to Mione, guys. So that is massive and huge. Thank you guys for supporting Mione and the work that he puts out into the YouTube space. Really excited to hear and see that milestone. More and more Final Fantasy 14 creators crossing over that 100K milestone. Maybe one day we'll get there. Who knows? Who cares? It is what it is. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here. Be sure to go follow Chris's. All his content should be linked, throughout the whole social network, etc. Thanks for joining us on, Twitch, where we film these live and more. So, Chris, why don't you take us out?
Guys, I'm over on Twitch right now, so I'm going to be doing lots of stuff. The schedule's starting to get a little more variety, so I'll try to post something about it. But come hang out. There's so many great people on Twitch right now, so I totally understand. If anything, go watch them too. There's so much great stuff coming out, and I really appreciate all the effort that the content creator community has been swelling up and doing, and I'm meeting all sorts of new faces. Some of it thanks to Lulu, some of it thanks to you guys, and I think that's really great. But either way, we appreciate that you spend the time with us that you do, and we'll see you next time.